Alright, what's going on, guys? This is Joe. I wanted to give you a quick tutorial on Quizlet. It's one of the things that I use pretty often when I'm studying. I like to break things down, be able to basically repeat and reproduce my study habits anywhere I go, right? So with Quizlet, one of the things I love about it is that you can download the app on your phone, you can take it with you, you can access it pretty much anywhere that you go. So on your phone, on your tablet, on your computer, while you're sitting at home studying, while you're, maybe you're at school and you have just a couple minutes of downtime and you want to flow through a couple flashcards, you can do that with Quizlet. It's one of the things I love about it. So I'm just going to go through a couple basics with Quizlet. I feel like any new technology that we have or any new system that you have takes some time to kind of learn the ins and outs of. So I wanted to give just a super basic overview of Quizlet so everybody kind of had a baseline to start from. So let's take a look. So first thing is you're going to want to create an account. It doesn't cost you anything to set up a free account, very basic account. There is a teacher's version that does cost, and depending on how you get it set up, it takes away advertisements. You have different diagrams you can use, different themes. You can allow people to join onto your group or like your students per se. And it's basically about $36 a year. So if you have, for instance, a study group or anything like that you think you may be accessing more of a group system, then I think you'd be able to, it's definitely gonna be worth it. For $36 a year, it's definitely worth it for the pro version. It also gives you access to more like pictures and things like that you can add to your flashcards to make them a little bit more dynamic if you are more of a visual learner, and we'll look at that here in just a second. So diving in, like I said, this is the teacher version here for $36 a year. You can track progress of the other people in your group or your students. You can create engaging content, meaning you can add the images and actually record your own content for those flashcards, which is really neat. Not a lot of things offer that. Organize your classes, different themes, offline access, removing the ads. So if you did nothing else but just removing the ads and also having offline access, that's going to prove to be super valuable when you're studying. So being able to download them onto your phone, use them anywhere you are, if you're on a plane, on a long flight, whatever the case may be, I think it's going to prove to be pretty valuable. So moving back, this is basically your home page when you get onto Quizlet, right? So I've had Quizlet for quite a few years, so I've got different things in here, different folders that I've created, different classes that I've created, different study sets that I've created, lots of different things like that. So as we take a look at this on our home screen, you can see right over here on the left-hand side is kind of our panel, different settings, different study sets individually. But basically, to get started, you can either create different classes for each class that you have, which will allow you to do a few different things. I like to use folders personally, but one of the things you can do is just come right down here, create a folder, which would be a new class. So we'll just call it new class. You can enter a description if you want. So let's say you have a class that goes over multiple terms, A and P and different things like that. You can set it up to where you have a folder for each class with each term. So you know specifically where everything's at. And that's where I would add that description of like, A&P 1, spring term, 2019, whatever the case may be. Once you create those, they pop up into folders like this. And initially, they are completely empty. All right, so let's just pick this one, for instance. This has a few in it, but initially they wouldn't have any of these. These are called study sets. So what you do is this would come up blank and it would say, you don't have any study sets yet. Would you like to create one? And there's a big button in the center that says create study set. Now, once you've already added a few to your folder, the way you would do add study sets at this point would be to come over to add sets. And now this is going to do a couple things for you. You can either add sets that you've already created. So if you went in and created a set specific to one assignment or specific to one chapter, you can add those sets to this folder. Or you can go right up here and create a new set entirely. So that's where we're going to start for right now. And it's going to pull up with this, which is pretty neat. Very, very intuitive. It doesn't take very long to learn exactly how to break it down, but it's very important to stay organized when you're studying, when you're kind of working through some of the new things you're learning, right? So you can do subject, chapter, unit, anything that you want to correlate this study set to. So I've gone into detail about specific subtypes of chapters, For instance, hematopoiesis or blood formation and blood cell formation in the body. It's very complex. As simple as where does it come from, all the way down to specific types of cells, what they're used for, what responses in our bodies would provoke more or less creation of those specific cells. Right, so it's very, very dynamic. So what I like to do is create study sets that are specific to concepts I want to learn about. So if it's hematopoiesis on a large scale, on a big picture idea, then I'll call it hematopoiesis. But if it's more specific, like a disease, a blood disease, or like Hodgkin's lymphoma, for instance, I would call the study set Hodgkin's lymphoma, even though it is technically part of the hematopoiesis pathophysiology section. I would specify more exactly what those cards are going to be, so that if I had any issues with that, I could go specifically to those and kind of break them down and study them a little bit deeper. So with that being said, again, we're just going to call this, we'll call it test set, just because you can import from Word or Excel or Google Docs or things like that. It's very, very simple to write these. I don't know why you would write them in another system and then bring them into Quizlet. But if you, for some reason, wrote them in a Google Doc or wrote them in an Excel format and you wanted to import them, you could. So the first thing that I like to do, if you wanted to change the visibility, you could. So if you wanted to make them private, for instance, to where it's just you to see it, certain classes, certain people that have passwords, you can do that. Basically, one of the beautiful things about Quizlet is that most study sets are automatically public. Meaning that if you wanted to skip the input process, which I don't recommend, I think it's really good for memory retention to be able to actually go through and create all the flashcards. But let's say you didn't want to do that. You could actually search for an entire study set that somebody has already created, and then just import it into your study groups and your study sets. So it's pretty nice in that sense too. But in any case, you're going to want your visibility to be whatever your preference is. So if you want your preference to be just you, you can add it to be just you. But as it is now, it's visible to everybody, only editable by you. Meaning anybody can click on it and see it and copy it to theirs, but they can't edit your version of it, right? So, which is obviously the way you're going to want to go with that. So moving on, once you set up the set itself, you just get after it, right? So you're going to add a term in here, and let's say, since we talked about it, let's say Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it's going to automatically populate down here if you want to, and it's going to give you options, which is I love Quizlet for this. It'll give you options to specifically how you want to lay out your flashcards, right? So let's just say I want Hodgkin's lymphoma, no HL, because I'm probably not going to abbreviate it like that, right? So let's just say I want to go with Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now immediately this is going to automatically be selected, which is your suggestions. Now, if you don't want that, you can deselect it. You can go right on about your business, and it'll never suggest anything to you. I recommend having it on. Saves you a lot of time in the long run, right? So when you turn this on, what this does is once you write in your term and you tab over to your definition side of your flashcard, it's going to give you the top 3 used definitions for the term that you've inputted. Right, so click on it, it'll actually go down and talk about the Reed-Sternberg cells and things like that. Now maybe you're looking at it from a more broad spectrum, or you just want to know that it's a blood cancer, right? You don't really need to know that there's the Reed-Sternberg cells and their large B lymphocytes. You don't need to know all of those things, right? So let's say you don't need to do that. We're just going to backspace all of that, and it's going to give you all of these. See, so chronic malignant disease of the lymph nodes. Maybe that's all you actually need to know about Hodgkin's lymphoma at this point in your journey. You just click on that, it's going to automatically populate, and then you can move on to your next term, right? With a lot of terms and a lot of people out there that are visual learners as well, one of the great things about Quizlet is that there's an icon right over here, and you can actually add an image of whatever it is you're putting together as a flashcard, right? So now with lymphoma, it's a little bit more difficult because there's not really specific images associated with the beginning steps of learning about Hodgkin's lymphoma, right? Very few nursing students are going to be able to look at a cell like this and say, oh yeah, I can see that is a Reed-Sternberg cell, and this is Hodgkin's lymphoma, right? Very few nursing students are going to be able to do that right off the bat. So it's probably not super helpful for that. But let's say petechia. And everybody pronounces it different. Petechia, whatever the case may be. Let's see if it has any images. Perfect. So as you click on images of this would be a great example and a great opportunity to add images to your Quizlet set. Having images like this will allow you to associate what you're seeing with what you're reading so that you can understand it better, right? So when you start to understand what petechia is and what it looks like, then as you're going through the process of working through, what could this possibly be? What are we treating this like? What are some of the concerns? Blood thinners, etc. These you can start to, like I said, associate pictures with the words, which for a lot of people is super helpful. So to do that, you would literally just click on the image. It's going to attach it to your flashcard, and you can move on. And so I'm just going to add a few terms in here. Throw a couple pictures in here also. So it's not a wide array of flashcards by any means. I had hematopoiesis on the brain. So these are all lymphocyte and neutrophil are both white blood cells. White blood cell has a normal card. Petechia is something that you see a lot with bleeding disorders or a lack of white blood cells or platelets. And then Hodgkin's lymphoma is a disease of lymphocytes, or white blood cells. So once you have, I believe the minimum is five terms, you can create the set. So then you can come down here and hit create. It's going to save it, and now it's a studyable set. So it's going to pop up and say nice, ready to share it. You can share it with classmates. You can share it with anybody that you might want to. Maybe your teacher. Maybe you have that agreement with your teacher. Say, hey, I'm going to send you this. Will you just check over and make sure they look right? You can share it on Google Classroom if you have that, or on Remind if you have that. And then it brings you to your studyable set, right? So this would be a set of flashcards I'd be able to come in and study at any point. So I can see as I scroll down the full flashcard here if I just want to look over it, right? So I can see the term, I can see the definition, term, picture, term, definition, and picture, right? As you're studying, this is super helpful. You can see it in flashcard format. So when it's up at the top like this, you say Hodgkin's lymphoma. When you click on the flashcard itself, it flips it to the definition side, which is super cool. And then you can move forward with your flashcards by just clicking on these arrows down here. Now, what I like to use more often than not are these options right up here at the top. They are super helpful when it comes to studying, right? So we know psychologically the best way to retain information, the best way to encode memory and retain information is by testing yourself. So actually having a sense of, I don't have the correct answer in front of me. I need to actually process through what is this? What is Hodgkin's lymphoma? How would I recognize, Reed-Sternberg cell, whatever the case may be. We know psychologically we will retain more information by testing ourselves on those things rather than just repeating them to ourselves like in a flashcard format. So one of the things I like to do is using this learn format. When you click on this, it's very, very simple. It's essentially like a multiple choice test, right? So what it does is it gives you the definition that you've written first, usually, and then it gives you options based on the rest of your flashcards. They could potentially be the right answer, right? So for instance, this first one says blood cells perform the function of destroying disease-causing microorganisms. And then it gives me 4 options from flashcards that I've already created so that I can then decide and test myself on the fly with those things I've just created, right? So maybe I'm going through it. I'm like, oh, I don't know. Is that petechia? Is that, lymphocyte? I'm not sure. I'm just going to try lymphocyte, right? You try lymphocyte. Oh no, man, that's not right. And then it goes through and breaks it down for you, right? Blood cells that perform the function of destroying disease-causing microorganisms, which is what we read, is a white blood cell, right? So it tells you the correct answer. You're like, oh man, I said lymphocyte. And then it tells you the correct definition for lymphocyte. So it creates that distinction for you immediately so that as you move forward studying, you're not making the same mistake twice, hopefully. And then press any key to continue. Chronic malignant disease of the lymph nodes, right? So you're looking through like, I think it's Hodgkin's lymphoma, right? And again, assuming that you have more flashcards than we have right here, you have more options, not Hodgkin's lymphoma, whatever the case may be. So I'm just going to choose Hodgkin's lymphoma. Correct, nicely done, moving on. And one of the things that it does is it progressively gets harder. So as you move forward, if you're just clipping through, boom, 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 it will start to give you options that are more closely associated with them. You have more answers that could potentially be correct the further along you go. It's going to start challenging you more, right? Which is again one of the best ways to actually encode and store memory. And as you can see on this, when you save pictures to your flashcards, they also pop up here. So in a lot of ways, these pictures are great because now you're testing yourself, but you're also associating terms and definitions with pictures. So the more you can associate things, the more you can test yourself, the better you're going to encode that memory. Right, so this is the way you would do that. It will keep going. It gives you different rounds, different progressions, and it tracks your progress also to where you can actually go in later and see like what areas you're weak in, what areas you need to study more. It's fantastic, really, really helpful. So I'm just going to go back to our main study set page here. And then I want to point out a couple more of these other things. One of the things I like to do is match, which is very similar to multiple choice, except these are more set up in like a game format. So when you start the game, it just draws it out like this, right? So things are all over the place. It's timing me. And then I can, at that point, start to move things around and correlate them with certain things, right? So if I'm the type of white blood cell that engulfs invading, okay, oh, neutrophil, boom, and now it goes away, right? So I can look at this and I remember, ooh, I know what that is. That's petechia. And you can start to pair these things and match these things as quick as you can, and then you're able to finish it, right? So it tells me, hey, you got first place, great job, 37.4 seconds. You can then play it again and then see, you can test yourself to get better, right? You can challenge yourself to memorize those things and draw those connections faster each time that you do it, right? Super, super helpful. I'm gonna go back to the study set. You can write them out, you can spell them, test, which is like a multiple choice format, but it's more of a test format, right? So I'm writing some of them out, some of them are multiple choice, but it's in a list test format like it would be if you saw it in most formats, most class formats. And then as we go forward here, there's a couple other options. Those are the best ones. Gravity is a game. You're going to have to be really particular about how you input your cards and your answers with these. If your study sets run 50, 60, 100 terms like a lot of them do in nursing school, it's going to be difficult to really get these down. But let's say we put it on easy because you just want to get an idea. It says watch out for the red asteroids. If you miss a term twice, they will destroy your planet, right? So the idea is these falling asteroids will destroy you if you don't type the answer fast enough. So this is a good example. So if you don't know what a lymphocyte is and you can't type it in fast enough with correct spelling, it will collide and not work out for you. So that's your whole answer, and if you don't type it correctly, then it will mark it as wrong. So I don't use the asteroids very often. The main ones that I use are the learn and also the match, which I just find is just a fun match game. If I'm sitting getting coffee or I'm waiting in line somewhere, I can throw the match game on there on my phone and just go through a couple terms, and it seems to be really helpful. So that's Quizlet. I'm not sponsored by Quizlet at all. I just use them quite a bit when I'm studying, and I think they're really, really helpful. So I hope that helps. Hope that gives you an idea about just kind of a really basic way to use Quizlet. There's a lot of other things that are really neat about it, like sharing your study sets. So let's say you have a big concept. Let's say you're going over acid-base imbalances and electrolyte imbalances with your nursing class, and you all have different sections, but you still want to learn all the information. This is a great opportunity, a great way to do that, because I can create a study set based on sodium imbalances, and then I can share that with the rest of my class or the rest of my group that we're studying, and then they can do the same, vice versa. They can now show me, they did phosphorus, and so they've sent me what it is, hypophosphatemia, hyperphosphatemia, all of those different things, and the manifestations, and all of those different things that come along with that. So it's really, really great, not only for learning and memorizing, but also for collaborating with your classmates, which, if you didn't know already, is huge in nursing school. Being able to collaborate, being able to use everybody's strengths and weaknesses to have the strongest possible outcome is going to be advantageous in the long run. So again, this is Joe. I'm in nursing school. I'm just trying to lay out some tips and things that are helping me along the way, and be looking for more videos.